Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Tonight's topic is homelessness, and I think it's an issue that is grown of late, and I fear it could become even bigger with concerns about inflation, recession, higher interest rates, etc. My guest is Jody Steinhauer, who is the president and chief bargain officer, that sounds interesting, of and founder of an organization that's been around for a while called Engage and Change. And she's also going to tell us a little bit about a new organization that she's started that's really taken off. Welcome to the show, Jody. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Brian, for having me.
Thank you very much. So tell us, if you could, what is Engage and Change?
Engage and Change was a love project that turned into a charity when 24 years ago, I found out that homeless shelters and outreach programs were coming to my company, Bargains Group, and purchasing things like socks and underwear and winter clothing. And when I saw the disparity between what they needed and how much money they had, I thought, this is crazy. We're in a very wealthy city. And I got together a bunch of business leaders. We all pitched in a bit of money and we created winter warmth kits. And we then called that Project Winter Survival. Fast forward to January, we gave out about $500,000 worth of supplies to 200 plus outreach drop-in agencies so that they could hand them out on the streets so that nobody would freeze of this frigid weather we're having.
So this was just a couple of weeks ago, I understand.
Yeah, middle of January. It's always held in the middle of January because in the middle of January with global warming, that's when really the cold usually really sets in. And in December and before Christmas, people are really generous. But once December 26th comes about, the shelters have nothing. So really important. We have, we work very directly with the people on the streets who are out there, and they're telling us what they need and when they need it. And in the summertime, we do another project called Project Water because we found out that, believe it or not, more homeless people actually die of dehydration than they do of the cold. So we thought, again, this is crazy.
Really? That's fascinating.
Yeah, most people are shocked by that. So in June, we distribute over 750,000 bottles of water. And again, we come together as business people and we build Project Water kits, which are very different. There's a hat, there's sunscreen, lip balm, hygiene product. Imagine if you're on the street all day long, what would you need to live the extremis? You can live 3 weeks without food, without water, but you can't, 3 weeks without food, I should say, but only 3 days without water.
And so you're telling us that this started from your business, and your business, I understand, is called Bargains Group?
It started from the charities, me supplying charities and them making me aware of the problems. And then we decided to do something about it, which branched into these two projects, which then became a charity because business leaders said, we will help you and donate more money to you. We see where our money's going, but can we get a tax receipt? So we became a charity because people like the banks and the insurance companies and business leaders said, we see where our money's going from a philanthropy perspective. It's not like a golf tournament or a gala. And we want to build more kits and get more people, give them hope so that they're not going to freeze.
So Bargains Group was a business, but is now a charity.
Nope, Bargains Group is still a business. Bargainsgroup.com is a 34-year-old business that supplies charities, retailers, and anybody who wants to buy anything by the case. Still a business. Engage and Change is totally separate. It's a 23-year-old charity. And we donate a tremendous amount of product to the charity and we leverage our suppliers, but it's very separate.
And you describe yourself, Bargains Group, as Canada's favorite discount wholesaler.
That's what we do.
Fantastic. And this event that you have in January, is it just your business or numerous different businesses that get together to donate the product?
We traditionally always hosted it. This year we were really lucky. It's grown and grown and grown. So a wonderful organization called Apex Global Logistics donated warehouses for us. And it's everybody coming together, donors. So for example, the banks will send out teams of people. And it's a pay-to-play model. So we have no employees at the charity. It's all real grassroots volunteers. But we do need to still raise some money because, we have to pay an accountant or we have to purchase some of the most expensive supplies, which are sleeping bags and backpacks. So teams of people come together, about 150 people. We build 3,000 plus kits. It's a well-orchestrated machine. And then over 200 charities and agencies show up as we go outside and load the vehicles. So, we have long-standing donors, CIBC, Scotiabank, RBC, like all of the banks are there, which is amazing. And then we have a lot of different, teams, perimeter, different development and real estate companies, people who generally are concerned and want to make a difference by rolling their sleeves up and actually doing something.
You posted recently that how do you change the world? One random act of kindness at a time. Do you really believe that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the compound effect of being kind to people. And, I always say that people say to me all the time, when I see a homeless person, I don't know what to do. And I say, it's pretty simple. Look them in the eyes and smile and just say hello. That's just the start.
It's a great attitude. We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Jody Steinhauer, talking about homelessness, talking about the events that she has held. And I think one of the things that, Jody, you really want to talk about is that government can't do it, and needs our involvement in the private sector and as volunteers. And so we're going to probably really focus in on that. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Jody Steinhauer. She is organizing numerous different events and charities in regards to homelessness. And one of the ones that you mentioned earlier that we haven't talked about is something called Kits for a Cause. Tell us what Kits for a Cause is, if you could.
Kits for a Cause is a social enterprise, and it came about organically about 7 years ago, as there was this really turn in the business sector of businesses talking about CSR, employee engagement, giving back. And there was all of a sudden this wonderful movement of wanting to do something, but then they got blocked and they had a blockage. How do we do it? So we tracked 500 calls in 94 days. And if they were in Toronto, we would talk about our charity, Engage and Change. They wanted to send out groups of people to volunteer. But because many of them weren't in Toronto, I decided, well, I've got this great recipe of how to engage corporate people to help the less fortunate. Why don't I just teach people how to do it? So Kits for a Cause is really about matchmaking. I say I'm a broker of goodness, and I match companies with causes or charities that they feel passionate about, or help them find ones in their local community, and develop this business model for them, a program where it's their model, and teach them how to do it. We do majority of the work for them and teach them how to market it and talk about it to, at the end of the day, engage their employees, make their employees proud of the companies they work for, and most importantly, help those community members and charities that are in so desperate need.
And this is something you've been doing for 3 years or so?
It's been about 6 years right now. And the other challenge is we started this pre-COVID, but the charities right now are just embracing this, because when COVID hit, nobody could engage volunteers anymore. If you were a group of people that wanted to go out, you couldn't go to a charity. And a lot of those groups now have moved on to different models. So we also provide the same model to charities. So Brian, if you called up and said, I've got 30 people and it's Give Back Day and I want to come down to XYZ charity, their mouth kind of drops open and says, oh my gosh, what are we going to have them do? So now we can be a resource for them, or they can call us and say, we've got this group. Can you help them? And can you engage them? And we just ask the charity, what do you need in real time? And we orchestrate that whole event, because there's so many complex issues about giving to charities that lots of people have the good intentions in place. But when they actually give to a charity, the charities don't necessarily need exactly that in real time. And they have no place to store it. They have no storage facilities. They have no volunteers to count it. So we kind of are taking all the business rules that we've learned and said to the communities, this is the model that you should be doing. And it's really, really taken off. It's gone global in the last 12 months. We're very, very excited that people from all over the world have noticed what we're doing at Kits for a Cause and want to do it. And we're literally in every country now, UK, Australia, New Zealand, all over the United States. It's really taken off. And it's the new philanthropy model and volunteer model that is going to take over and make charities thrive.
Jody, I really congratulate you and appreciate you for doing this. But why? Why do we need this? You know, we've got such a prosperous economy. We've got such a a prosperous country. Unemployment is at an all-time low. Why do you need to hand out 3,000 winter survival kits? Why is homelessness still an issue? Why do you have to create this charity structure that you can spread out across the world? Why do we have this problem?
Well, I think, unfortunately, you mentioned it earlier on. We're a broken world right now. There's a lot of people hurting, and our government can only sustain so much. And, we used to talk about, well, it's the government's responsibility. We can either point fingers and sit and wait for it not to happen, or we can use our business acumen and do something about it. And I look at homeless people as entrepreneurs. They're just looking to kind of survive. Their survival is a little different than ours. But at the end of the day, they're also consumers, right? And they either give or take from our tax system. So our government is not a bottomless pit. Mental illness is at a whole all-time high. I remember many, many years ago when they shut down in Canada the mental institutions, the hospitals. This was the first thing that said, what do they think is going to happen to these people? And, we hear morning, noon, and night what's going on. Hospitals right now are becoming shelters because homeless people, I heard stories the last week, homeless people are going into emergency wards praying that they'll keep them warm. Okay. People are getting arrested, so they'll actually go to jail so that they can have a place. I mean, this is crazy behavior, but these people are you and me with really bad luck. And, people who have experienced homelessness these days are very different. Look at our cost of living. You are 2 days late on your rent right now, and somebody evicts you. Where are you going to go? There's no shelter beds. And if you have children, you may get separated if you have a teenage boy. There is such a complex myriad of issues, but at the end of the day, there's not enough housing. And we need support. You can't just give someone a roof over their head, but how do you expect someone to get a job if they don't know where they're sleeping that night?
There was this report, in the press just this past week that we had these shelters during COVID, but they were costing $200,000 a year to house people. So it seems like they do have. Beg pardon?
You're talking about the hotels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do try, government does try to come up with some solutions, but they're unbelievably expensive solutions. There seems to be an incredible amount of waste. Is that part of the problem?
Well, I think there's a lot of issues. I'm not a politician, but housing is number one. There was great news when those hotels, and a few of them are still open, Streets to Homes, which is a great organization from the city of Toronto. I believe the number was they got 2,300 people that were in those, they got them housing. So, there are some good stories. There are some great models. But if you take a look at real estate, period, I mean, as a business person, there are solutions to homelessness. That's the great news. It's not it's not kind of like when people talk about cancer. There is a solution to homelessness, and many communities are doing it. But think about right now. I heard on the radio this week that there's a 23% vacancy rate down in the Bay Street area. Well, just imagine if they could identify some smaller office buildings that could be retrofitted to be single-use shelters, and maybe the government could come in and offer those tenants that were in those buildings, business people, and pay for them free rent to move on to Bay Street. Right. But you need to identify where you can put these people, and you can't just put them in the middle of nowhere. They need to have social workers and people to help them reintegrate into society. It's a combination of both. But with, condos going up every second you look around, that's a challenge. You have to start with the number one thing, housing. And once you have housing, then you can start working on the next steps of getting people back into society.
I heard this statistic that 80% of people that are homeless have mental health issues. Do you think that's true?
Again, I think it's a very high percentage. I don't know if it's 80%. I think it's a very high percentage. And they also, people also talk about addictions, and people also talk about all the other things. Well, again, they're just trying to survive, right? Nobody chooses to be homeless. I mean, the temperatures have just been frigid the last week. Who would choose to stay outside? But there are no shelter beds. This is the first year we've ever seen it. We helped a woman on the street the other night. She got let go out of the hospital. When you go to the hospital, the first thing they usually say is, do you have someone to pick you up? And they don't let you out. But they let her out of the hospital. And she said they called the shelters to get her somewhere to transport her to. and there was no place for her to go. So they had to let her out. I mean, this is inhumane. This should not be happening. What do we expect as human beings? And again, there's so many people. I've had presidents of companies that I've done business with. I had a woman several years ago who called me. She was a president of a company. She made 6 figures. She drove a Mercedes, and she called me one day from a women's shelter and said, Jody, I never understood why you focused on what you do, but I'm in a shelter right now. My husband beat the crap out of me and took my keys. I had to grab my kids and run to a shelter and stay here last night. And thank God, because I'm probably wearing some of the things that you've helped provide. Thank you for the work you do. I mean, those stories.
This is the CEO of a company? Seriously?
President of a company. Yeah, it's people like you and me, Brian. You think about somebody's had, how many people at our age group have gone through a divorce and somebody isn't getting alimony payments and doesn't work and all of a sudden ends up can't pay their rent, right? These are simple stories that can happen to people like you and me. We met a woman we had at our charity a couple of years ago. She worked in a law firm, downtown Toronto. She was living in a storage locker, okay? Nobody knew. Her kids didn't even know. She was going every morning to the gym, which she got a health club membership because of where she worked as a law firm, taking a shower, getting ready, and going to work. But she was living in a storage locker because that's all she could afford. These are crazy stories that happen every single day. But what we try and do at Engage and Change and through opportunities to speak like you're allowing me to is understanding that people who are homeless, okay, or experiencing homeless, right, are people like you and me with really crappy luck a lot of times. And yes, mental health issues then are potentially activated. But there is a cure. Again, remember, let's talk about the positive things. Think about the new legislation where you can have, laneway homes and basements and all of that. If people have any opportunities where they can offer up a building or retrofit, or imagine container homes. There's so many models around the world that have been proven to work. But at the end of the day, the government could identify some structures and buildings and turn them into long-term, like these hotels. These hotels did marvelous things for people during COVID because they gave them the privacy, a roof over their head, some stability, and then they were able to get 2,300+ people out into housing. That's a great story.
Homelessness, I understand, is a problem in suburbs as well. I think I was told that we see it in Toronto because it's out on the streets, but in Mississauga and Brampton and some of the suburbs, it's people living in cars, and that's the big issue. Is that true?
People living in cars, people living in squats. We held the press conference this year and the event up in the 905 region in Vaughan. And we wanted to go out and take the reporters out to show them. And up there, it's very difficult because it's not like you said, it's not like there's a street where you can go down to an area where you'll see a bunch of homeless people. There's also a lot of couch surfing, which we call the hidden homeless, people who are begging to stay on someone's couch from one night to the next. And when I first started, there was not anything in homelessness in the 905 region. So nobody had that. But the sleeping in cars, I got a call a few months back, broke my heart, from a reporter. He covered my stories for 2 decades. He came to our press conferences and he called me and he said, I was laid off from the network. We know there's been a whole bunch of media amalgamations over the last several years. And he said, he was in the Mississauga, Brampton area. He said, I've been living in a woman lent me a room in her house. I was paying $600 rent. I'm so grateful. She just told me she's selling the house because of the real estate boom. And I have nowhere to go. I'm unemployed. I'm, 60+ years old. And I've been sleeping in my car. I can't afford even the gas to keep the car and the warmth going on. Is there anywhere you can help me? These are the stories of everyday people that nobody hears.
Okay. So I come back, Jody. You say it's people that have got bad luck, but why have we got this problem in our prosperous society? You talked about government action that's going to allow laneway housing and basement housing. Has government been the problem that we've restricted housing? We've got, some of the highest, housing and average home prices in the Western world. What's caused this problem?
Shortage of housing, period, right? Shortage of affordable housing. and support services. And I truly believe a few decades ago, when we closed down the institution that helped with mental health, there was several of these institutions. And when you talk about earlier, the percentage of people with mental health, if people are suffering from mental health, they're not able to function without assistance. So how do we expect them just to be, figuring out how to get a job? I mean, this is not possible. So I think it's a complex situation, but we need to identify more permanent housing with support services. And we also have to have facilities who can focus, like CAMH and places like this, that can focus on, in the different communities, people suffering from mental health. They have different needs. And unfortunately, many of them do so. The other challenge, which people don't think about, is people are incarcerated in prisons. When they let people out of jail or prison, right? Many of them, they don't know where to go. They don't know where to turn. They don't have a job. They don't have food. They're let out. Where do they go? So there's this whole integration piece back into society too. So I really believe if we tackled these three issues and had more resources, which are from the government, that this would be a much less of a problem into our society. And it's only getting worse as the mortgage rates. I'm terrified as the mortgage rates just keep going up and people are starting to renew their mortgages, right? What's going to happen when they can't pay their mortgage anymore? They're going to become sadly homeless. And where do they go when the shelters are full? Shelters are not the solution. They're a temporary Band-Aid, but at least they're there. And we're always going to have some homeless people. There's no question. But the numbers are just going through the roof. And the numbers, I believe, are far greater than what's being reported.
What do you think the number is in Toronto or the Greater Toronto Area? Any idea?
Oh, I think it's probably closer to 15. They're talking about it's 10, 11,000. I pulled up a Facebook thing with someone speaking at our event 20 or so years ago. And the numbers back then were 600 people homeless on the street. And now it was at 10 or 11,000. Right. So how do you count? Right. So I think it's probably closer to 15,000.
In Toronto?
In the Toronto GTA, that would be my guesstimate. I see, remember, in my business in the day, I see them coming to me morning, noon, and night saying, we've got to get more socks. They're purchasing products from us. So I see the numbers escalating right across the country. And they do gravitate. People experience homelessness do gravitate to the bigger cities because there are more agencies and services there. But in the summertime, normally you see a lot more vacancy in the shelters over the summer because it is nicer. But even the summertime, the shelters were full, right? So this is a challenge, and opening more shelter beds is not the answer. When it's freezing cold, having more warming centers and having them open 24 hours. I mean, these are human beings. Nobody should be freezing outside, but overall, it's just identifying affordable housing and maybe mandating, again, I'm not a politician, but mandating, rent escalations and rent hikes and things like that, because that's the challenge. We all know how expensive it is to live. But how do you do it when you're on, government assistance and getting less than even if you get government assistance, you're getting less than $1,000 a month. Where are you going to find a place, right? It's very difficult.
Jody Steinhauer, thank you so much for raising this issue with us. Tell us what your charities are, what the websites are, how people can help out if they're interested.
Sure. If you'd like to donate and get involved, engageandchange.org is the charity. If you are supporting a charity or a religious institution, and that's another thing, Brian, we didn't talk about how religious institutions are really stepping up. That would be bargansgroup.com. And if you're a business or a company and you want to bring some of this wonderful philanthropy, kitsforacause.com.
We're going to take a break for some messages and be back in just 2 minutes with Jody Steinhauer, talking a little bit about some systematic solutions to this problem of homelessness, because I do think it's an issue that we need to address and we need to give some deep thought to. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking about homelessness tonight with Jody Steinhauer, who It runs a business that provides products to a lot of different companies as well as charities, but also runs two different charitable organizations that we've talked about, and a big event in January and another one in the summertime, it would appear. One in January providing kits to people to survive in the cold. And then in the summertime, I didn't realize that so many people had problems with access to water. You'd think we'd have enough water fountains in the city such that people wouldn't die of dehydration. So I was shocked about that. Jody, remind us, if you could, the two different charitable names and the name of your event in January.
The charity is called engageandchange.org. And the two projects are Project Winter Survival in January and Project Water in June.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I want to come back, if I could, to this systemic, really, change that we need to have. He said it was lack of housing supply that was really causing the problem. And I want to talk about that. And you mentioned that the government recently has passed a bill that would allow things like laneway housing and basement apartments, legalized basement apartments, things like that. I really think that government has been more of the problem than the solution in the past. We have some of the longest time periods for approval of new housing in the Western world. The red tape is unbelievable. And we restrict things fairly dramatically. And I've been told by some people that they think that a lot of that restriction is caused by the fact that turnout in elections is very low, and the people that tend to vote are established homeowners, probably look a lot like me, rather than homeless people, younger people, renters, newcomers to our communities, etc., such that too many municipal politicians are too influenced, regrettably, by the established older homeowner that doesn't necessarily want to have greater density, greater height, social housing, cheaper housing, et cetera, in their communities. Rather than, if everyone voted or we were doing what was actually the right thing, we would dramatically increase supply. Premier Ford, the Ontario government, has recently come out with a target of 1.5 million homes over the course of the next 10 years. CMHC, Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, say that we actually need 1.8 million incremental homes over and above what would normally be built in a regular market to keep any level of reasonable affordability, not even lower the level of affordability, make it more affordable, but just to keep the current level of affordability in the next 10 years. It sounds like an almost insurmountable task. And the NIMBYism, where people don't want to have higher density, higher heights, inclusionary zoning, social housing, basement apartments, whatever, in their neighborhood, seems to be a massive problem. What's the solution?
Well, that's a big mouthful that you've thrown. The solution period is housing, right? We're human beings. The first step is having a roof over our head and knowing where we're going to sleep every night. That's the first step. So whether, unfortunately, the compound effect of, you look at downtown, whether it be Mississauga, Brampton, or Toronto, it's just a sea of condos and skyscrapers, right? So the density is already there. But unfortunately, what did they turn their heads on and not give it to, and instead gave it to a developer in a profitable company to make a condo? So we have to catch up now because the problem has really caught up to us. So looking around, maybe they can give incentives to people to tax incentives to donate buildings or donate portions of building and build affordable housing. When you're dealing with homeless people, though, you can't just put them in the middle of, people have said to me, well, why don't we, there's land north of the city. Why don't we just, take some farmland and build a place? Well, they need the support. They need supportive services around them. And usually in the cities are where the agencies are that can support them to help give them those skills to get back into society. So whatever we do have to make sure we have both. We can't just give homeless people a roof over their head. They need social workers. They need things like that. And that is, so just imagine taking an office building, okay, and on the first floor, or a condo building, and on the first floor, you usually have, a convenience store, maybe a pharmacy, maybe a shoe repair, a dry cleaner. Imagine those places there could have different social work type departments and healthcare professionals to help these people get well physically and mentally. So that kind of model of community is what it is. We're looking at I look at food banks, I look at libraries. Those are, the hubs of the communities. Well, take back the libraries and maybe make sure that we can look where our libraries are and maybe get some housing vacancies around the libraries and bring in some social service workers into those libraries to help in those community places. There's already Head Starts in different communities. Food banks now. I mean, many of the average people are going to food bank because the astronomical cost of food. I say to people all the time, if you can't afford food, you're choosing basically paying your rent sometimes over food. You're not buying things like toothpaste and deodorant. So we're seeing an influx at my other organization, Kits for a Cause, where we're encouraging people to help us build kits of full-size hygiene products to donate to the food banks, or school supplies for the families. They can't afford those, to donate those to the food banks. When a family comes to pick up food, they can also get the other essentials of life. So I don't know the answer, Brian. All I know is that every time a government body gets another application to build another condo, somebody's got to ask that question: could this somehow have an affordable housing component? Or where in our community could we convert, whether they be warehouses or buildings, or offer developers incentives to build low-income housing? There's models of container housing. There's so many different models out there. So maybe the advantage is for the government to offer business people financial incentives to do this instead of what they're currently doing. It's a complex. I'm not in the government. It's a complex situation, but our city as a city is going to just erode, right? It's got to have an effect on conferences, the economy, tourism, all of these things come in mind, because, if all of a sudden we're known as the city where people are just wandering around the streets, right? That's not good. It's not good for anybody's economy.
Well, so it's that, but it's also, and this isn't affecting homelessness, it's more affordability. But, people have talked about the Manhattanization of Toronto, where only the rich can live. Yeah. And I think that's an issue.
Huge issue.
If people that are, in those entry-level jobs can't afford to live anywhere close to the city and close to the jobs, how are we going to actually get work done and get our meals prepared and our meals served? And you talked about all the shoe repair and hairdresser and laundromats and other things. The people that work in those that are making minimum wage or a little bit more than that, they need to live, and they need to live in Toronto too.
Yeah. And that's another issue. I mean, as a business owner, having how many employees that I've tried to hire, and they've said, like, I just can't
afford it.
Live in Toronto. I can't afford to live there. So I've got employees who drive, an hour or two away or work remotely. And, you take a look you drive up to a Tim Hortons or a Starbucks these days, and they've got, the lane closed. Sorry, we don't have enough workers today. This is a problem everywhere, right? And but it all stems on housing. It all comes back.
All stems on housing. I think that's right. Let me. I'm a firm believer in mixed income housing. I don't think that having a St. Jamestown or all the people living up north in an area that's a ghetto just for the poor, or the homeless, makes any sense. I think mixed income housing is the right solution. People need that community that's dynamic, that's mixed income, that has all different income levels represented, is the right solution. And inclusionary zoning has been a way of achieving that by demanding that developers build. It was 10 going to 20%. The provincial government has now ratcheted that down to 5%. But let me ask you a question. From what I understand, and, Build and different organizations did surveys of this last year when we were talking about inclusionary zoning. 12 different cities in North America have tried inclusionary zoning. Only 2 have done that without incentivizing the developers. And you talked earlier about giving businesses some money or some incentives to do the right thing. The only 2 were Portland and Toronto. That put in place obligations to have a certain amount of housing that was at a lower level of cost, so that people that needed it could afford it. In most cities, they incentivize developers by giving them extra floors or extra density or extra something or other, such that it became an incentive. In Toronto, it was just an obligation. So you got to build. It's now been ratcheted down to 5%, but it was 10 to 20% of more affordable housing. Is that part of the problem, that governments aren't willing to provide incentives?
I mean, I think mandate 5% is way too low. I mean, what's 5%? And how long is it even going to take once they say, okay, we agree to do that, right? And again, the question I would have is, and I don't know the answer, did it happen? Where are those places, right? So 20, 25%. I believe, like you do, mixed up. There've been some incredible areas where we've seen that having people mix it. The challenge is, I mean, in my area, there was a nursing home, a long-term care facility that was recently purchased in North York. And I can't even tell you how many neighbors, there was a rumor going around that it's opening up as a homeless shelter, right? Neighbors were flipping out. They were all emailing me and say, do you know about this one? And I said, listen, like, hopefully it is, because within 3 blocks, there's all these homeless people sleeping in the park and on the street. So at least they'd have somewhere to go into. And they're not going to bother you. You really don't have to worry about it, right? Be happy, but we have to take these facilities and open them up in every neighborhood. And I think that's part of it is public awareness and education, right? Homeless people or people experiencing homelessness are not horrible people, right? They're people who are looking to survive. And I do believe it's our duty in every neighborhood to be able to help and provide that. And every developer should be held to the fire to say, you know what, if you want to develop whatever the area is, you need to provide X amount of affordable housing within your community, not just kind of, there's the building over there, right? And I agree with you. The mixed housing, I think, is the solution, but we have to recognize that homeless people need support services. So we can't just build it over there. There needs to be a cluster of agencies who can support, and there are everywhere, whether it be Mississauga, Brampton. Every community now has Canadian Mental Health and different services to help. So we have to work together with the service providers to say, what are the numbers are you seeing? And how long can someone potentially walk, or can you go out to them? Because every community is experiencing this. And the gentrification of our cities is a beautiful thing, but we can't forget those and leave them behind and not address the situation. There's warehouses that can be retrofitted. There's a lot of land that can be used wisely, but it just takes some really smart politicians and urban planners to come together and commit to it, and quite frankly, do it quickly, because we don't have 10 years to wait for this.
I had one developer told me the only solution was land given for free by governments, and that governments had to make better use of their land as a way of justifying cheaper housing.
Schools, take a look at, there's areas where the enrollment are schools, right? Take a look at a school that's got classrooms. Take a look at a building that physically has maybe the roots that could be retrofitted, and then maybe merge 2 schools in a community together. I mean, there's so many different options. There is a shortage of land and housing, but until people start talking about how can we do this, not if we can do this, right? And I think that's the conversation that has to place. And as you said earlier, people who are voting are just fed up and exhausted. It is the younger generation. I've got 5 children. They're just kind of like, well, I don't know if we're ever going to be able to afford to buy a house, right? I've got a friend who's trying to rent a condo, a 1-bedroom in Toronto, $2,600, right? That's ludicrous, right? But what's your choice? You've got a job, you've got to find a place to live. There aren't a lot of choices. So we have to demand better. We have to put pressure on our politicians. And there has to be action.
So one of the things that the provincial government tried to do in Bill 23, this most recent legislation, is reduce dramatically development fees. Some people have been saying that development fees, which are about $140,000 per new home, are a tax that make it unbelievably economic. If you start building something and the first $140,000 goes to development fees as a tax to the local government, by definition, it's going to be more expensive to build that housing. Is that one of the solutions?
I think it's all part of it. But back to your comment, if the government could donate land, right? If they could donate some land or buildings, and builders can say, great, we will all come in and donate, part of our services and get some affordable housing up. And that model could be just replicated in every area. That's what we need. We need it for, it doesn't have to be large rooms. Think about a hotel room. That worked really well. It was a single room. It could be even smaller than a regular hotel room. It just needs to be a secure place where we can put many people in a place and have the supported services.
Yeah, the problem with that, which was a great program during COVID, was that the hotels were available because people weren't traveling.
Right,
during
absolutely.
COVID, particularly business and group travel in downtown Toronto. But they're not available today, regrettably, and so that the governments have largely terminated those programs of renting out or contracting with whole hotels.
But as a business person, everything's for sale, right? So I am sure there are some hotels and some operators, because most hotels are franchised. There are some operators that are like, you know what, I'm exhausted, and for the right price, maybe I would sell.
Yeah, well, in fact, what's happening in Toronto is we're going to have actually a reduction for the first time in history of downtown hotel rooms, because a lot of those hotels are actually being bought up by developers that want to build housing. And so we're actually going to have less hotel rooms. So it's going to be a real problem. We're going to take a break and talk a little bit more after the break about what some of the potential solutions are to this problem. But before we do that, Jody, remind us, if you could, about what the charitable organizations are, what the websites are, and how people can help out.
Sure. If you're looking to purchase or help out your local community, your faith-based or shelter, bargainsgroup.com, you can come to, and we can get you helped out at wholesale prices. If you want to be involved with the charity at every capacity, engageinChange.org. And if you're a business and you want to bring active group volunteering, philanthropy in a program, kitsforacause.com.
Jody, really appreciate you joining us tonight. It was very helpful to understand the degree of problem of homelessness. Your comment about it's not 10 or 12,000, maybe actually 15,000 people that are homeless in the Greater Toronto Area is concerning. And I do think that affordability, generally lack of supply of housing, generally are some pretty critical issues.
Absolutely. And, we need everybody's support and understanding. Part of the challenge is, they don't teach this in school, right? The definition of how do you become homeless or experience homelessness. This is something that the more we educate, the more I talk to people, just like you, Brian, you were surprised of some of the things I shared with you today.
I was. Jody Steinhauer, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to give you some of my solutions to this housing problem. Stay with us, everybody.